I mean, it's crazy, you know, like, how would you take my name and not have the decency to ask
Most
me?
definitely. I got on the name like 10 years ago when it wasn't about that. It was about what I was going to turn it into. You know what I'm saying? And that's what it is. Shout out to dude, whatever he doing, but I don't know him.
Everyone knows him as Rick Ross, the rapper that raps about his days. But he was never actually the real Rick Ross. Apparently, he stole his whole identity from a real-life drug baron. Ordinarily, this wouldn't be such a big deal, but this is a man who started out as a corrections officer. But this former correctional officer didn't just steal the name. He also tried to portray himself as one real-life drug kingpin in his songs, leading the real Ricky Ross to sue him.
I don't have to make up lies to make music and talk about 100 keys and you think it's fabricated. In your world, 100 keys may be a whole lot to you. Where I come from, that's a weekend of work, man.
But how did this all start? Let's get into it. Before the world knew him as the self-proclaimed boss, Rick Ross was William Leonard Roberts II, born January 28, 1976, in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and raised in Carroll City, Florida. Long before the beards, shades, and luxury Maybachs, Ross lived a life far removed from the gritty drug kingpin persona he now projects. In the mid to late 1990s, Roberts worked as a corrections officer in Florida, a career path he rarely spoke about during the early stages of his rap rise, which he in fact denied. Well, official records later confirmed that he served for 18 months before he resigned.
Were you a corrections officer?
I can tell you one thing.
Hello?
I'm the boss and the biggest dude in the game.
When he finally stepped into music full-time, he didn't present himself as a former law enforcement employee. Instead, he created a completely different character, one which stood on the opposite side of the cop he was, an untouchable kingpin with international connections, dripping in luxury, and feared by his rivals. The name he chose, Rick Ross. The irony was clear to those who knew the real story, but for most fans, it just sounded powerful. His breakout moment came in 2006 with the hit single Hustlin'. The track's hook, "Every Day I'm Hustlin', became an instant anthem, painting Ross as a street mogul moving major weight in the drug game. The single's success led to a bidding war between record labels, with Jay-Z's Def Jam ultimately signing him for a reported multi-million-dollar deal. Ross doubled down on the image in his debut album Port of Miami, filled with vivid imagery of smuggling operations, cartel connections, and the lavish spoils of a empire. But here's where the cracks began to form. In hip-hop, authenticity is everything. And when documents emerged in 2008 proving that Ross had worked as a corrections officer, the internet went into overdrive. Memes, forum debates, and diss tracks questioned whether his kingpin persona was just an act, because a whole lot of young people were buying the image he was parading. Ross initially denied it, but when the evidence became overwhelming, he eventually admitted it, while still maintaining that his music reflected real stories from the streets, even if they weren't always his own.
Person that looks like you online, who's working as a correctional officer, is that or is that not Rick Ross in those pictures?
That was me in the photos.
Okay.
Most definitely.
Still, controversy didn't slow him down. Ross continued releasing chart-topping albums, building Maybach Music Group, and collaborating with some of the biggest names in rap. The name Rick Ross sat pretty cool with him.
As much as maybe $1 million a day, $2 million a day sometimes, maybe more, you know, a few days. This wasn't every day though, right. It was like, we had days that...
That's how much you were taking in?
Right, in one day.
Well, somehow that name belonged to someone else, long before Rick Ross was born. Now, a coincidence could happen, but it wasn't that because this man's existence and reality is all Rick Ross the rapper is portraying. The man behind the original name is Ricky Donald Ross, born January 26, 1960, in Troop, Texas. Raised in LA, neighbors called him Freeway because his family lived by the 110th. Later, as his business grew, he bought properties along the 101st. The name stuck because it fit both the map and the method. His childhood was lean. He found ways to earn early, mowing lawns, pumping gas, and selling lemonade. School didn't catch him. He shoplifted, got into fights, and then found something that did hold his attention: tennis.
I played tennis every day when I was young.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't take days off. I worked.
Like you genuinely loved it.
Oh, I really loved tennis. And not only loved it, but I felt it was my savior.
Yeah.
I felt that would be the way that I got out of the hood.
So he chased a scholarship. Recruiters noticed his game, but when they realized he couldn't read, the chance disappeared. He would later say the system failed him there. He left high school soon after, with college off the table. His first step into wasn't a grand plan. Late 70s into early 80s, he tried flipping a small amount. Bought for $50, sold for $100. Instead of getting high, he got paid. The quick return made sense to him. He sampled the product once, felt nothing, and decided he'd be better off thinking clearly than using. That clarity, he believed, helped him scale. A teacher from a community college upholstery class made the introduction that changed everything. Small quantities turned into larger plays. When that first link ran dry, he moved to Claudio Villavicencio, aka Ivan Arguelles, when Arguelles was shot and paralyzed. Henry Corrales filled the gap. That's the beauty of Freeway's growth. He continued growing, running the business like a legitimate hustle. That chain led to a key relationship which involved Oscar Danilo Blandon. You need to understand that Blandon was somewhere high on the chain because he was the one supplying both Henry Corrales and Ivan Arguelles. Blandon didn't just sell him supply, he mentored him on volume, price, and consistency. Later on, after jail in an interview, Freeway said that the only mentors he had were drug dealers or killers. But in this business of drug dealing, he had one of the best mentors because at times the price dropped to around $10,000 per kilo. This was far below the street norm and with reliable purity. With that advantage and the skill to cook powder into crack, Freeway built a working system. By 24, he was a millionaire. His network spread far beyond LA, St. Louis, New Orleans, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Seattle, and many more. Prosecutors later estimated that from 1982 to 1989, 3 metric tons moved through his operation, grossing around $900 million and netting close to $300 million.
By the time I was 24, I probably was doing $1 million every day, and 200,000 was profit. I'm selling drugs all around the country. I got a crew of 50 guys. Life was good.
Some accounts say there were days with $3 million in sales, and claims of annual tallies reaching the billions circulate in interviews and reporting. Whether you take the totals or the high-end claims, the scale was massive. He treated it like a company. Layers of salespeople, distributors, and cooks. Thousands of jobs, illegal but organized. He kept a low profile to avoid heat, plain clothes, older car, no loud displays. He avoided open conflict, telling people he tried not to make enemies. He also argued he sold to people already hooked and that if it wasn't him, someone else would step in. In later years, he would accept partial responsibility for the damage the crack era brought to poor neighborhoods, while also pointing to a wider system that looked the other way when it suited larger aims. The pressure came anyway. By 1985, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department had him on the board. In 1987, they formed the Freeway Ricky Task Force. Some cases fell apart because of police misconduct, planted evidence, and physical abuse, so those charges were dismissed, but the window was closing. His first big conviction hit in 1990, tied to in Cincinnati. He pled guilty and took a 10-year sentence. Then something unusual happened. A federal probe into corruption inside the same sheriff's operation that had hunted him changed the picture. He agreed to testify about what he knew. The result, he was out in less than 5 years, by 1992. Freedom didn't last. In 1995, a DEA sting set up by his former supplier, Blandon, now a paid federal informant, pulled him back in. The government supplied the product. The case stuck. Because it was a third felony according to the law, he received life without parole. Prison is where he rebuilt his mind. In the library, he taught himself to read. He has said he was around 28 when literacy finally clicked for him. He studied his own case history and found an error most people would never see. His earlier Texas and Ohio convictions should have counted as a single strike, not two, under the 3 strikes rules. His lawyer checked, agreed, and used it. The court reduced his life sentence to 20 years. He served 14 and walked out in 2009.
You know, I'm running around a USP with Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, As a Man Think. You know, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and stuff like that, the Millionaire Mind.
Things didn't get better for Freeway because while he was fighting for his freedom, his name was pulled into a national firestorm. In 1996, investigative reporter Gary Webb published the Dark Alliance series in the San Jose Mercury News. Webb traced Ross's source, Blandon, back to networks tied to the Nicaraguan Contras and alleged that U.S. power brokers knew money was feeding that war effort. The series focused on Ross, Blandon, and Norwin Menezes and said their ring opened a major pipeline from Colombian suppliers into black neighborhoods in Los Angeles, sparking a wider explosion. The reaction was immediate. Community leaders demanded answers. Traffic to the newspaper's website spiked past 1 million hits a day. Then came the pushback. The Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Los Angeles Times ran pieces criticizing Webb's sourcing and framing. The Mercury News later retracted aspects of the series, citing shortcomings in writing, editing, and presentation. Official investigations by the CIA, the Justice Department, and the House Intelligence Committee rejected Webb's central claim of direct operational ties between the agency and the dealers. Still, the Justice Department report flagged issues that looked troubling, including how Blandon received permanent resident status and signs of reluctance to probe activity at Ilopango Airport. Even with the official denials, many readers felt the story showed at least a pattern of looking away. Supporters of Webb said the series forced the government to admit more than it wanted, even if the agencies didn't concede the core allegation. For Webb, his career never recovered. He died in 2004. For many, that tragedy became part of the larger story about how far a reporter can push on sensitive ground and what happens when institutions circle the wagons. For Ross, the takeaway was simpler. The supply chain that supercharged his rise was bigger than any one street crew. Fortunately for him, his sentence got reduced, and by the time Ross came home in 2009, he wasn't the same man who went in as he was now literate. He moved toward legal business. He spoke at schools, community centers, and re-entry programs about why the fast money pitch, drugs business, is a trap disguised as opportunity. He pushed for prison reform and better drug laws, saying the system punishes people from certain neighborhoods far more harshly than others and that non-violent offenders need real paths back. He wrote an autobiography, Freeway Rick Ross. The Untold autobiography in 2014 earned industry recognition for it and kept telling his story on camera. Documentaries like Freeway, Crack in the System, and episodes of American Gangster profiled him, and elements of his life helped inspire the TV series Snowfall. He also entered the legal cannabis space, making a point that if the country is going to regulate and profit from a market people once went to prison for, returning citizens should have a chance to participate. All of that sets the stage for what happened next. Because while he was locked up, another man rose to the top of rap using his name. When Freeway stepped back into the world and saw Rick Ross headlining festivals, shooting luxury videos, and rapping in the voice of a kingpin, he didn't see a coincidence. He saw his identity and story on someone else's billboard.
You know, he won't even admit that he stole the name. He tells people that he invented the name. Like, how the f do you invent this name?
Before striking gold as Rick Ross, Roberts performed under the name Teflon Da Don, making his debut in the early 2000s on Eric Sermon's compilation Def Squad Presents Eric Onassis. But sometime in the mid-2000s, he switched to Rick Ross as his primary stage name, explicitly borrowing from the real Ross, despite their lack of connection. Roberts, the rapper Rick Ross, later claimed that his choice of name was actually an evolution, or perhaps a mishearing of his high school football nickname, Big Boss. According to interviews and legal filings, he suggested someone simply misheard Big Boss as Rick Ross, and the name stuck naturally in his mind as a stage persona.
Some guy was trying to call him Big East and accidentally called him the Big Boss, and then somebody else called him Rick Ross. It went from Big Boss to Rick Ross. That's his story.
There is at least one court strategy that picked up on this claim. In the legal battle with Freeway Rick Ross, Roberts' counsel asserted that the nickname Rick Ross was derived from that high school moniker rather than an intentional reference to the drug lord. Regardless of Roberts' explanation, many fans, critics, and cultural commentators saw the adoption of the name as highly suggestive. After all, Freeway Rick Ross's story had been extensively documented in the media, including Gary Webb's Dark Alliance expose in 1996, and had become a powerful symbol of the crack epidemic and the underground drug economy, so there's a room for doubt. In addition to the name, we can see that the rapper cultivated a Kingpin persona with his music. His breakout single, Hustlin', 2006, featured lines about moving weight, flaunting wealth, and running the street hustling. That persona aligned closely with Freeway's real-life narrative of large-scale drug distribution, deep underworld connections, and millions in profits. This alignment wasn't just lyrical, it extended into artistry, music videos, and the hustle mentality. When the corrections officer past of Roberts came to light, it created a jarring contrast that listeners didn't easily reconcile. A law enforcement veteran playing the part of a drug baron. Even Joe Rogan, whose podcast famously hosted Freeway Rick Ross, criticized the rapper's explanation. Rogan called Roberts' Big Boss origin story the dumbest story I've ever heard. He questioned how someone could invent a name that matched so completely with a famous criminal figure without intention. Roberts himself did acknowledge that Freeway's story grabbed him, a statement that doesn't outright admit theft, but suggests a certain fascination or inspiration drawn from the original Rick Ross. Lyrics, imagery, and name converged to create a dramatic persona built on that fascination. To Freeway, this wasn't a weird coincidence. This was personal. Rick Ross used my whole name, and he probably gained the most stardom out of everybody. It just makes you feel like, what's with this guy? Why can't this guy just come out and say what I am and what I do? And then the way he raps about selling drugs, and he never sold drugs. It's almost like making a mockery of what normal people go through. That last line hit hard. Because you know Freeway's story. You know he didn't just sell drugs. He ran a empire in the 80s, making millions a day at his peak. The life the rapper was bragging about, Freeway had actually lived there. Although the rapper says he didn't take Freeway's identity, the similarities after he took the name Rick Ross are bold, bald-headed, bearded, heavyset. In hip-hop visuals, that look became part of the boss aesthetic. Fans and critics noticed it immediately, and whether intentional or not, it made separating the rapper's image from the real-life drug kingpin almost impossible. Then came the persona, the deep voice, the no-nonsense tone, the I run the game swagger. Roberts' lyrics about moving kilos, stacking millions, and running a drug empire sounded a whole lot like chapters ripped from Freeway's real-life history, except one of them had lived it and the other was performing it. Well, despite all these, when Freeway took legal actions on this, it didn't really go down in his favor.
They said I should have filed 5 days before I got out of prison. I think that's what the judge said. She let them win on statute of limitations.
So here's how things played out when Freeway Rick Ross decided to make his stand official and legal. In June 2010, just about a year after his release, Freeway Rick Ross filed a $10 million lawsuit in federal court. He wasn't just naming the rapper, William Leonard Roberts II. He took aim at the whole ecosystem, Def Jam Records, Universal Music Group, and even Jay-Z, who was president of Def Jam when Rick Ross signed on. The claim? that Roberts and his team were profiting from Freeway Rick's name and story, turning his identity into a brand without his permission. That lawsuit didn't last long in federal court. In July 2010, a judge dismissed the case, mainly saying it didn't belong in federal court because California state law handled those publicity rights claims better. The same judge hinted that Freeway Rick's own actions, knowing the rapper used that name since around 2006, but not filing until 2010 hurt his case legally. So even though his album Teflon Don came out right after the dismissal on July 20th, 2010, Freeway Rick wasn't out of the fight just yet. Not one to give up, Freeway Rick refiled the case in California's Superior Court in 2011, this time pivoting to claims under California's rights of publicity laws. Defendants now included Warner Brothers Records along with Universal and Def Jam. Jurors were set to circle in early 2012, but once again the lawsuit was dismissed this time based on statutes of limitations and the idea that the single publication rule meant Freeway Rick had to bring his claim earlier. The case didn't end there. Freeway Rick appealed, and by December 2013, a California appeals court delivered the final word. The ruling? Roberts, the rapper Rick Ross, could legally keep using the name under the First Amendment. Judge Roger Boren explained something that's key here. Yes, the rapper's persona used parts of Freeway Rick's real-life story like dealing, but those elements were just raw materials. Roberts had used them to construct a new artistic identity. The judge pointed out, "We recognize that Roberts' work, his music and persona as a rap musician, relies to some extent on plaintiff's name and persona," writes Judge Boren. Roberts chose to use the name Rick Ross. He raps about, brags about his wealth. These were raw materials from which Roberts' music career was synthesized, but these are not the very sum and substance of Roberts' work. Rick Ross, rapper, might have won the court verdict, but that doesn't mean he didn't take the name from Freeway, or that it wasn't inspired by Freeway. If he had just come clean about the name and his time as a correctional officer without using flimsy excuses, it would have given him some credibility too.